In a small town in the state of Georgia, at the end of a long dusty road lined with pecan trees, there stood a white wooden house with a wide porch and a single rocking chair that never quite stopped moving. Even when no one sat in it, the wind nudged it gently, as if remembering the rhythm of the woman who had rocked there for most of her life. Her name was Margaret Ellis, and at 84 years old, she had become something of a quiet legend in Millbrook. Children whispered that she knew everyone's secrets. Adults said she had lived through more history than the town library could hold. But Margaret herself would have said she was simply a woman who stayed. She had been born in 1938, when the country was still struggling to breathe after the Great Depression. Her earliest memories were of her mother kneading dough at the kitchen table and her father coming home with tired shoulders from the cotton mill. Money was scarce, but dignity was not. Her parents carried it like a family heirloom. As a little girl, Margaret would lie in the backyard at night, staring into the wide southern sky. She imagined the world stretching beyond Georgia, beyond the fields and dirt roads, beyond everything she could see. She dreamed of tall buildings in New York City and steep hills falling into the sea in San Francisco. But dreaming and leaving were two different things. At 18, she met Thomas Ellis at his auto repair shop just outside town. He had grease under his fingernails and kindness in his eyes. He fixed her family's old Ford truck and refused to charge her. "You can pay me back with a smile," he had said. She did more than that. She married him beneath a magnolia tree in her parents' yard. The ceremony was simple: homemade cake, folding chairs, cousins fanning themselves in the heat, but the promise they made felt larger than any cathedral. They built their life piece by piece. Thomas opened Ellis Auto Repair, and Margaret became a schoolteacher at the local elementary school. She believed fiercely in children. She believed every one of them carried a hidden spark, and she made it her mission to find it. Their house filled with noise when Samuel was born, and then rose 2 years later. Margaret sang while washing dishes. Thomas whistled while fixing engines. Evenings were for supper at the kitchen table and stories on the porch. When 1969 arrived and a man walked on the moon, Margaret and Thomas sat side by side in front of their small television set. The screen flickered black and white images of astronauts stepping onto lunar dust. Margaret squeezed Thomas's hand and whispered, "The world is bigger than we thought." Time moved the way it always does, without asking permission. Samuel joined the Navy and sailed far beyond the Georgia coast. Rose moved north to New York City to study painting, sending letters home filled with descriptions of skyscrapers and crowded sidewalks. Margaret stood on the porch the day each of them left, waving until the car disappeared down the road. Her heart ached with pride. Then came the autumn morning when Thomas did not wake up. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, holding his hand long after she knew he was gone. 50 years of marriage ended not with drama, but with stillness. For weeks, she set 2 cups of coffee at the table by habit. For weeks, she listened for the sound of his boots in the hallway. Grief moved into the house like an uninvited guest and refused to leave. But Margaret had learned long ago that survival was not optional. She had watched her parents endure hard years. She had watched the nation stumble and rise again. So she chose, deliberately, to keep going. She planted a larger garden that spring. Tomatoes, green beans, squash, and sunflowers tall enough to catch the light before it reached the house. Working the soil gave her hands something to do while her heart healed. She also began leaving the porch light on every night. At first, she told herself it was habit. Thomas had always liked the porch lit. But deep down she knew it was something else. It was a signal, a quiet promise that anyone who felt lost could find their way to her door. One summer afternoon, that promise was answered. A thin, nervous 12-year-old girl named Lily Harper stood at the edge of Margaret's yard. Lily's family had just moved to Millbrook from a larger city. She felt out of place, like a book on the wrong shelf. Margaret spotted her from the porch. "You looking for something?" she called gently. Lily hesitated. "My mom said you grow the best strawberries." Margaret smiled, recognizing loneliness when she saw it. "Well then, we better make room for another set of hands." They planted strawberries together that afternoon. Margaret showed her how to loosen the soil without tearing the roots, how to water just enough, how to wait. "Growing things takes patience," Margaret said. "You can't rush them." "Does it always work?" Lily asked. If you care for it long enough. Margaret replied, something good always comes. Lily began visiting every Saturday. She listened as Margaret told stories about growing up during hard times, about marrying young, about raising children who chased bigger dreams than she ever had. Margaret listened, too, as Lily spoke about wanting to become a writer, about wanting to see the Golden Gate Bridge and travel the country. Then you must, Margaret said firmly. Don't shrink your dreams to fit a small place. Years passed, and the strawberry patch grew stronger. So did Lily. Margaret aged slowly, like a book whose pages turned with care. Her hair grew whiter. Her steps grew softer. But her eyes remained bright. The porch became a gathering place. Neighbors stopped by for advice. Former students returned to thank her. Some brought their own children to meet the teacher, who once believed in them before they believed in themselves. One winter evening, when Margaret was nearly 90, a storm rolled through Millbrook. The wind howled. Rain beat against the windows. The power went out across town. Margaret sat in her rocking chair, wrapped in a quilt Thomas's mother had sewn decades ago. The porch light, of course, had gone dark with the electricity. She felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest, not fear exactly, but awareness. A knowing. It was a knock at the door. It was Lily, now grown, soaked from the rain. She had returned to Millbrook after college. She had become a writer, just as she promised. Her first book had been published that year. I didn't want you to sit alone in the dark, Lily said. Margaret smiled. I've never been alone. They lit candles and sat together while the storm passed. Lily read aloud from her novel. Margaret closed her eyes, listening to the cadence of a dream fulfilled. You did it? Margaret whispered. You helped? Lily answered. When the power returned, the porch light flickered back on, steady and warm. Margaret passed away quietly in her sleep a few months later. The town gathered at the small church on the hill. Stories filled the room, stories of encouragement, of kindness, of second chances. Lily spoke last. She taught me that staying can be as brave as leaving, she said. She taught me that tending a garden and tending a person aren't so different. She left the porch light on for all of us. The White House still stands at the end of the dusty road in Georgia. Another family lives there now. The garden blooms each spring, and every evening, just before dusk settles fully into night, the porch light switches on. Some say it's just habit, but others, especially those who once needed that light, know better. They know that in a small town in Georgia, an old lady proved that a life doesn't have to be allowed to be extraordinary. Sometimes it is enough to stay, to care, and to leave the light on for whoever might come searching in the dark.